you to our presenters so far. Great content for all the attendees. Thank you for hanging with us. Those of you that have been here the entire time. So we're going to go ahead and dive into the panel. Joining me on the panel will be Johnny, who's been your MC for the lion's share of this presentation. He's the practice principal of our Protect practice. Joining him again will be Doug Lynn. So we're just going to carry you over, Doug. So go ahead and hydrate. Chris Paget, who's one of our senior consultants, responsible for architecture around Microsoft, Okta, some of the identity plays. And then Pascal Pierre-Louis, who is another identity architect here at Alchemy. They'll be rounding out our panel. So guys, welcome to the show. I'll dive in with the first question. So we've highlighted a number of solutions today, all of the technology variety for obvious reasons. They are addressing evolving threats and a number of risk factors. So, as a point of advisory beyond technology itself, what are some of the more fundamental mindsets or approaches that the audience and our decision makers, administrators, and architects should take back to their environments to bolster their security posture, reinvent their security programs, or just take that next step forward? So let's decouple it from technology. What do you think the mindset and the approach should be? I'll start with you, John.
Sure. Thanks for putting me up first. Happy to answer. I think here's my take, right? I think that we have to all realize that, the traditional rules still apply, right? And I heard many of the presenters talk about it. Good security involves a great end user experience, but it still depends highly on the people in the process as much as the technology. And I'll give you an example, right? So many of the very public breaches that we hear about still, if you map them back to the actual root cause, many of them are like misconfigurations or process issues. So think Capital One, Target, Experian. Many of those weren't technology. They all had the technology in place, but it was a people process issue. They just weren't lacking the technology, and they just had hiccups in that particular portion of it. So I guess the way to look at it, even the greatest of technical solutions, ultimately that just is going to require people to set up, configure, maintain those solutions, which in turn means, you need to have a good checks and balances, good policies, procedures, that sort of stuff. Those have to be in place to make sure that, they just need to be solid. I guess the last thing, just thinking about that, the last thing any of us want is to invest, all that time, all that money into a solution only to just easily open the back door for a hacker, because they're so easy to prevent. It's just, checks and balances are good there, right? So a lot of money goes into the technical solution, but if we don't put the people process behind it, I think that we just leave that front door wide open. And I'm not just one to make that up. We see it on the news every day.
Yep, gotta love those screen doors, right? Pascal, we're going to question to you next.
Yeah, sure. I would say that having the willingness to adapt, and as we saw, through all the presentations, our threats are continuously adapting. So should the mindset and approach of those responsible for protecting, organizational assets. That mindset also should come into play when you're selecting the solutions that, will be part of your overall security ecosystem. Because ultimately, when you're picking your solutions, you want to go with ones that continue to adapt as the threat landscape changes. Because essentially, that's what's going to help you as administrators, help to simplify your ability to adapt. So, in conclusion, I would say that, just that overall willingness to adapt, I think, goes a long way in that mindset, because these threats are adapting. So you want to make sure that you are adapting and continuously holding essentially your security solution ecosystem accountable for adapting as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, sir. Chris Paget, mindset and approach. What do you think?
I think one of the things that companies need to realize is that security is not a endpoint. It's not a set point that you're going to basically get to security and that's where you're going to stop. That you're going to have to always continually evolve, and you're going to have to keep up with how technology is changing. So basically focusing on nowadays with cloud computing, that you have to look at, you can't really control at the perimeter level anymore. So you have to adapt to go to what you can control. So looking at identity, looking at behavioral login positions, looking at how you're controlling your device management, how you're containerizing your applications and containerizing that data on those endpoint devices, so that the device itself becomes irrelevant because you're securing at the data and your application layer.
Thanks, sir. And Doug, I think we touched on a few of these points in your presentation, but fundamentally, what is your guidance, that you work with a lot of our enterprise customers?
Guidance. The best thing that I can say is minimize the exception policy as much as possible. We can all say, and we've all seen this before, where we've been in, environments and, hey, we have this server 2003 server that has been sticking around because it is an absolutely critical app. That by default is an exception process. Minimize that, get that out of there. To kind of expand on what Pascal was saying just a hair there, be adaptive. Hackers, these hacks, these incidents, everything that we see is moving at the speed of the cloud. It is so fast progressing that it is hard to keep up with. Trying to protect a system that is, even 5 years old, let alone almost 20 years old, trying to protect that in today's world is impossible. There literally is no way to do it. I mean, those things can be compromised there all the way through. So unfortunately, I'm going to have the really dull answer of one of the best things we can do for security is blocking and tackling. Update, patch, get rid of old stuff.
There you go. That's a very fundamental approach, but I think it still makes sense and applies.
Mm-hmm.
I'll target towards Chris and Pascal. So, Chris, double click on a response you had a second ago. We've been pushing identity as the new perimeter for the last 3 years here at Alchemy, due kind of this borderless IT phenomenon that we're up against, to be honest. With that being said, you guys do a number of engagements. What are some of the challenges you continue to see for those customers pursuing either an identity and access management strategy pivot or new platform? Just kind of take us to some of those challenges, as I know a number of customers attending are either in the midst of that, on the tail end of that, or just about to launch. I'll start with you, Pascal.
Yeah, sure. I would say that from my experience, I would say that the users about the same time ensuring positive user experience along the way. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, absolutely. You're back.
Okay, cool. All right. So I'm not sure what you heard, but I'll just repeat what I said again. I said that from my experience, I would say that the biggest challenge is juggling the balance of securing your end users while at the same time ensuring that they have a positive user experience along the way. A couple of suggestions there based on the experience of doing this out in the field. First, consider the impact of the user adoption rates and planning for whenever you're planning for your access authentication policies. For the most important goal essentially is to secure your access for your critical resources, and you want to do so in a way that's easy for users to understand and essentially simple to adopt. Unfortunately, as Doug mentioned earlier, if you fail to do this, that often leads IT and security teams to create exception policies. And when it comes to your IAM solution, oftentimes those exception policies they are often put in place for your VIP or your C-suite users. And as we saw earlier, those are your most targeted users. So you want to avoid that at all costs. And for that reason, when you're picking your IAM solution, you want to ensure that you pick a tool that empowers you to build that flexibility into your policies so you can avoid those scenarios and have higher adoption rates. And for example, having the ability to deploy secure passwordless auth, or having the ability to leverage contextual or behavioral policies, which essentially will dictate when and how users need to authenticate. And the second point that I'll make to help, as a suggestion, is really spending the time to focus on user communication and adoption strategies. That helps go a long way in helping to increase your adoption rates, because essentially your number one goal is not only to secure users through your IAM solution, but to increase your adoption rate, because that increases your effectiveness of the solution and ultimately helps reduce your overall risk.
I like that formula, Pascal. I mean, to me, high user adoption equals good security. And the other thing I heard there, Jarrell, I'll just throw this in, is that since you're our CTO here at Alchemy, there are no exceptions for you. So Pascal just said you cannot be in any exception list.
No, absolutely. You got to lead from the front. So from following up on that, Chris, what are your thoughts as far as some of the lessons learned from the field side?
Well, one of the biggest challenges that I've seen with the implementations I've done is making sure that organizations are basically what we call organizational readiness, making sure that they have a plan to communicate with their end users, making sure the end users know that the product is going to be rolled out, what's going to happen with the rollout, what to expect, giving them the information they need so that the users can go through, get set up properly, get everything configured, make sure that they're set up so that when it actually goes roll out in the production, everything is ready to go at that rollout date. There's no such thing as having too much communication when you're rolling these products out. The more the end users know, the more they have questions answered, the more they're ready for it, and the more that they can get through the enrollment process, make it nice, quick, and easy. The end user's happy, and they think that it's a successful rollout. The other portion of it is you need to communicate between people that have basically ownership of the applications that you're going to be basically pulling into these type of solutions. So those people that have those applications, when you're setting up single sign-on, when you're setting up the integration between the two, it takes the IAM side of things plus the application side of things. If those two aren't ready, then it really delays the project. And it's going to, more delays in the project is going to basically result into more from the executives and people that are sponsoring the projects. They're going to ask questions, why is this delayed? Why is this taking so long? This is not a good solution if it's this hard to implement. The other thing about it as well is basically making sure that all the stakeholders are also informed and communicated with to make sure they know what's going on, where the process is, what to look forward to, if there's any roadblocks you run into. So just make sure you communicate and make sure that you know that everybody has all the information and you're not basically just assuming that people know what's going on.
Great guidance. Like any good relationship, communication is key. So completely support that concept. Turning it over to Johnny and Doug. So we've heard this undertone throughout the session today around modernization and spot solutions. So email security, antivirus, firewall technologies, these are nothing new under the sun. When we talk about modernizing a security program, what are some of the guide points that you guys are having in whether it's a pre-sales meeting with prospects or some of the advisory council sessions that we have with our customers for modernizing a security program? And what's the philosophical approach that you guys want to kind of plant the seed with the audience on? I'll start with you, Doug.
All righty. I would probably say that identification of technical debt is going to be a big part of that. So when we, look to some of these security modernization products that, at least on the stuff that I'm brought into, there's usually a very specific problem that we're trying to solve. And we can solve that problem for the most part. And I think that's going to be because of the level of complexity, the level of integration that some of these projects have. We may be able to solve a portion of what goes on there, but are there other things that may be associated with it? So looking at that modernization from a process perspective is kind of twofold. Yes, we do need to take that the specific goal of this project, whether it's EDR, whether it's next gen AV, whether it's adding in MIP or one of these kind of various things here, they're individual projects. I think the better goal for success is, even if you can't implement everything, having an overarching goal and an overarching map of where at this point you want to be, having a defined process around some of these security incidents that we can go through, and then just really having a little bit of oversight and policy at a whole level that we can reference. That from a success perspective, we may not be able to turn on MFA for every single app under the sun. And that's okay. But if we know that, and we know that there is maybe legacy debt that we can't turn on because of this reason, if we can identify that, have that overarching process, there may be another thing that we can throw in there to easily mitigate that risk. So yes, focus on the project at hand, focus on the technology, but don't forget the higher goal of what we're actually trying to accomplish here.
Great response. Johnny?
Yeah, I'll go a similar route, maybe a little bit different. I think that what I've seen and when I'm talking with customers is, I think it's possible to have your cake and eat it too, so to say. What I mean by that is it's kind of that the old best of breed versus platform conversation. It's probably just as old as the Mac versus PC debate. Let's see if I get any reactions from the team here. It's probably just as old as that debate, but who's to say which better? But what we're starting to see is really that the best of breed solutions, they're starting to partner up together, right, and create some real meaningful and sometimes free integrations. And it truly, kind of excels or advances the protection for the consumer. So they're much more integrated, much more holistic. For example, I'll tell you, take two of the solutions we saw today. Okta and Proofpoint. So both best of breeds, solutions in their areas for email and identity. But they partnered, created a free integration if you own both products that leverages the best of what they do and provides some seriously meaningful and real-time protections. Another one that we touched on and saw today, is Okta and SecureInz. Mm-hmm. If you're looking to implement identity access management and identity governance, these two solutions can really help you get off the ground and kind of in full swing identity management really quick. Time to value is, it's really super quick. So, I think Austin, sort of explained what that integration looks like. I've seen it. I've actually done it once or twice. It's literally wizard, right? It is next, done, copy, paste the key. So to me, it's things like that really make a difference that don't cost anything extra, but you don't have to make a decision, whether it's best of breed or platform, right? You can choose either one and make sure that your organization is protected overall. I'm a big fan of integration. So, when it comes to the real-time integrations and the tool does something for me that protects me even more, it's a win in my book.
Absolutely. So let's open it up to the entire panel. We talk about modern protection, and that's a reasonable concept, but let's be honest, the burden of proof of planning, relies on security professionals. And in this data-driven ecosystem and world that we find ourselves in, KPIs are essential. And we used to track things like number of spam messages drop, firewall rule hits, things of that sort. In this modern evolving threat landscape, what are some of the newer KPIs that you would recommend our customers or attendees take a look at when they get back into their environment? Pascal, I'll lead off with you, and then I'll make it to the rest of the panelists.
Yeah, sure. I'd say that with identity being the new perimeter, I believe that KPI should be focused on capturing metrics around user login activity. With that data, security teams you could build dashboards. You could even have automation around that collected data. For instance, maybe I want a dashboard that highlights how often my users are logging in from a new device or a new location, or perhaps accessing certain applications. Maybe I want a dashboard that tracks how often my IAM solution is blocking malicious login attempts. And around automation, perhaps I want to send a Slack message to my SecOps teams whenever my solution blocks a malicious login attempt. Or let's say I have a subset of accounts that typically register low risk logins, and suddenly I catch a high risk login attempt for that account. I can automate temporary suspension of that account. I can send alerts to my SecOps teams, and they can dig deeper and investigate. So, I say that capturing user login metrics and building KPIs and automation around this data is going to be key for changes to the threat landscape.
Yeah, I could see that, because when you look at APIs and things of that sort, from a risk perspective, that activity would be invaluable to start to remediate and automate some response things. So completely makes sense. Chris, coming to you next.
Thanks, Cheryl. Basically, since more and more users are working remotely and they're not within the protected office networks, I think companies should be looking into behavioral analysis of system access. So more like what Pascal was saying, the identity access, stuff like that, looking to see that it's important for companies to have IAM solutions that are able to see unusual login behaviors and be able to report those behaviors in real time. That's one of the key indicators that you really need to be looking for, is not just have the ability to look that behavior is happening, but have the ability to have a report and be alerted that it is in real time that you're having seen these unusual login behaviors for your users. So some of those behaviors, like impossible travel policies, seeing that a user has been logged in from one location and then they log into another location within a certain given amount of time, that's impossible for them to travel between those two endpoints. VPN connections, of course, are going to be false positives of that, so you'll have to take that into consideration when you're setting up those policies. Monitoring if the user login attempts are coming from IP geolocations that are not normally seen by the user. If that happens, basically prompting the users for additional authentication requirements, making sure that it is the user that is trying to log in, that it's not somebody trying to do a malicious login attempt, and watching to see if there's unusually high attempts at resetting a user's password. So if a user basically, if you have that self-service password reset functionality, you have the ability for users to go through that, to take that offload from your help desk. You need to start monitoring that as well to make sure that you don't have user accounts that all of a sudden, why did I have 5 password resets this day? That should be a flag, and that should be an alert to the users. So you need to start focusing on how to set up those alerts and how to set up those policies to make sure that you're on top of it. And that if you don't have the personnel to keep monitoring those logs daily, is have the ability to alert on it and be able to be known that the thing's happening, so you can go quickly take a look and see what's going on in your environment.
Absolutely. Doug, from a KPI perspective?
I'm going to take this in a completely different route. So from a KPI perspective, if we look through all of the different tools, and I know both Pascal and Chris have mentioned this one today as well too, the amount of AI, machine learning, end user behavior analysis that we see in today's security tool set is huge. So the traditional KPIs, the traditional metrics of, hey, how many spam emails did we block? Who cares, quite frankly, anymore, because it's irrelevant noise at this point. So what I would want to know from a KPI perspective is, we know that EDR, let's kind of pick on that one for a little bit. We know that EDI performed, let's say, 100,000 actions a month. Of those, what I want to know is how many were AI driven, how many were false positives, and if they were reported, how many of those false positives were actually valid. So that would be one KPI that I want to be seeing, because then now we can actually prove value if we have to, prove the value that we dropped a significant chunk of change on some of these security projects. That would be something where we have the knowledge and the visibility to go back to the business and say, this is not a technical KPI, because we all have those. What I want to know is, from a business perspective, can we provide value to the business? So how many were AI driven events that our SOC simply did not catch because we're not staffed up for it? How many were AI driven events where we were able to prevent X from happening, and we know that this event could cost us, I don't know, $3,000 an hour or whatever it ends up being? Those are the kind of metrics that I think are going to be valuable going forward.
Yeah, I think service disruption is another one that's out there. Yep. As far as impairment, degraded services, or just flat out platform availability. So, Johnny, I'll let you round it out, and then we'll have one final question for the panel.
Okay. Yeah, I always like this question. It's always an interesting topic. I'm kind of a believer in, let the data drive the decision. So I'm always looking for that next metric that's meaningful. I guess the way I think about it is, and you heard these answers between Doug and Pascal and Chris, at least I heard it. I was able to glean from it. I think know your audience, right? It's always important. So I guess, for example, if you want to create a dashboard and put it in front of your SOC or in front of your security admins, then what they're going to want to see as far as metrics and what's important to them is going to be totally different, right? They're going to want to see things that are going to drive their decision making. So they mentioned some common ones, but I'll throw some others out there that I've seen in the past. Number of blocked attempts at the firewall, whether it's in country, out of country, that sort of thing. Maybe number of patches deployed, kind of an oldie but a goodie, right? Number of missing patches. I always see the phishing stuff, right? Doug's kind of spot on. It's like, yeah, we block a ton of this stuff, but from a phishing perspective, if you're testing your users, how many clicks, how many opens, I think those are good metrics to display for the operations level, so that your staff has got a good pulse on, what the current risk level is. Kind of gives them an idea how well some of the processes and solutions that they've put in place are working. To shift it a little bit, on the other hand, I think if your audience is executive management or even your board, it's unlikely that type of stuff is going to be very meaningful. I think it's okay if maybe you drop in a little nugget from time to time, just to reiterate to them what's happening, but it's not a metric that you're going to get a lot of oomph out of with them. So they typically, what I see from them is they typically want to see risk level to the organization and then financial metrics to quantify the overall security spend. So I guess if you think about it, to me, that meaningful metric to show here revolves around, finding an agreeable way of measuring risk to the organization over, if you will, over the amount of investment towards mitigation of that risk. And what I'll say is that the key there is an agreeable measurement, right? Not just what the CISO thinks in the background. Because I've been there before. What I think is not necessarily what the CFO is thinking or the CEO and so on. And that's going to require, I think, that the security team, the security leaders, that's going to require some due diligence, right? They're going to have to go out and spend time with their executive team, understand their perspective, what's meaningful, and it also gives them a chance to educate them on, what some of the cyber risk is. I've seen many CISOs, throw in a bunch of those things that I've mentioned for a board level report, like here's how many patches we deployed and here's how many we didn't deploy. And it's great, but it doesn't mean a lot to them. It's just more about, telling them how busy you are, which is not a meaningful metric, right? If you are able to map it to, here's our overall risk that we're incurring, here's the amount of spend we're going to apply towards that, and here's what's left over, right? So we're going to mitigate this risk by spending $1 million. It's going to leave us, out of the 100% risk that we quantified, it's going to leave us with another 10% risk. Is it worth spending another $2 million to mitigate 5% risk, or are we okay accepting that? Those to me are meaningful metrics that are good for their executive team. And it gets them engaged in the decision-making process, right? So the CISO isn't kind of standing alone, making the decision on his own. He or she is not always the one that can accept the risk, but there's a little buy-in at that point from the executive team. So I think that's that's two different ways of looking at it, Jarrell. But and I've been in both spots where you've had to report up and report down on what those metrics look like.
Absolutely. So final quick question before we do our last giveaway and close out the summit. Parting thought for the attendees, something to take back to their environment. I'll start in my Brady Bunch panel from right to left. So I'll go with you, Chris. Bumper sticker, parting thought for the audience.
I think one of the parting thoughts, a lot of people that they seem to overlook is make sure your staff gets training. So make sure that whatever product you're going to implement, whatever solution you're going to put in place, make sure the staff is trained, because if they're not trained and they don't know how to take care of it, the product's going to fail.
There you go. Pascal? Yeah, I mean, I think I'll just go, do a quick summary of some of the thoughts I shared earlier. Just expressing the need for having the willingness to adapt, and again, ensuring that your solution stack not only helps to secure your organization's assets, but it does so in a way that doesn't negatively impact your end user experience. Because if you focus on those areas, that can go a very long way.
Okay, Doug?
Knowledge creates visibility, visibility creates urgency, and urgency creates funding. All of the tools that we talked about today, I love that quote. All of the tools that we talked about today are there to provide a service, yes. But at the same point, along with the metrics question, is they're all there to help us out as admins, as executives, as people that are in the business that are trying to do stuff on a day-to-day basis. We all have that problem of trying to do more with less. These tools, all of the tools that we put in general, help us, but they also help us create that visibility to make things easier to obtain and patch everything.
Johnny?
So I guess I get the honor of closing us out here. So let me say this first before I give the answer, Jarrell. So I hope that what all of our attendees have seen and heard here today resonates. We plotted this storyline out, not any kind of masterpiece that we cooked up behind the scenes in the Alchemy lab. Well, maybe a little bit of it we did, but more so, it's more so a reproduction of the story that we're seeing day in and day out across our customer base. And I mean, you guys, the audience, I'm sure you're reading it, across the world on the internet, that type of thing. As you saw the actual hack that Doug displayed, it really only took about 5 minutes, before data was actually compromised. That's pretty real world, so the solutions we brought to you, and shown and talked about today, they're really meant to be a part of that overall layered defense. Certainly they aren't everything you need in the arsenal. So I guess my parting thought is I'm personally a huge fan of tackling projects that solve the biggest risk first. So the risk can be ever changing, right? What's a risk today or high risk today may not be tomorrow. So I guess my advice is to consider implementing a kind of a continuous risk model for your organization. That way you always make sure that, what you're attacking and going after first is what matters the most, and you're doing it first. Another thing to layer in there is to, think about when you're going to try to tackle and do it yourself versus to look at outsourcing. We've talked about some services that, can be outsourced, but I think some of the more popular ones, biggest bang for your buck, SOC as a service or managed detection and response. Those are two that provide 24/7, 365 coverage, on your network, so that you can actually lighten the load on your staff, maybe get a little sleep, that sort of thing. Another one that I'm a fan of is consider leveraging a third party to be an extension of your incident response team. And the reason I say that is because they're going to have skill sets that you don't need every day, but when you need them, right? So think forensics and so on. Unless you work in very specific types of environments, you're not going to need a forensics person all the time. But when you need them, you definitely need their skill set, and it's not easy to find. So, I think those type of services, I think they not only help you operationally, but they provide that missing skill set that you may or may not have, or maybe you have a hard time finding and staffing. And in some cases, I think you'll find that you actually save some money overall. I live in the Baton Rouge area, and it's not the hot spot for a bunch of security admins. They're not just flocking to Baton Rouge to come work here. So I know that many companies struggle just from a staffing perspective, not to mention that overall, worldwide, there's a shortage there. So I think that would be my closing thoughts for all of our customers, Rob.
Absolutely. Appreciate that, guys. Been good content. So to our last giveaway.